Hi, my name is Anthony Atkins. I'm the Belmont County GIS Director. Belmont County is a mostly rural county within Belmont County, Ohio, which sits east of eastern portion of Ohio, right on the Ohio River. The GIS department within Belmont County is also a division of the county engineers department. So obviously working with the county infrastructure with roads, bridges, culverts, we're small enough that we have the autonomy to work with other GIS departments. So we're not a county-wide GIS department as much as we are a department, our departmental GIS department within the county engineers. But because we're so small, we are open to working with the various departments within the county. One of the main departments that utilizes GIS the most would be our 911 department. And that's exactly the department that I'd like to at least talk about with respect to the issues we have with addressing. The 911 is responsible. So in my presentation, I'll talk about the problem we're having, the process that we took to sort of solve the problem, and the final solution in doing that. So within Belmont County, 911 is responsible for maintaining the addressing database, which is great for the first responders. But the issue is that the addressing, the way the addressing is set up, it's designed to benefit the first responders more than placements for everyday people. So as the standard address will have house number, street name, city, state, zip code, the 911 address will have the house number and street name, but instead of a city, a mailing city, 911 utilizes a township, unless that address falls within a municipality. So in some cases you have a city, in other places a township. Also, another problem that isn't standard with 911 addresses, in some cases the road designation is utilized for addressing, such as County Road 72 instead of a common name, and that will throw us off. So some departments within the county require some sort of address validation. So so one such department is the Board of Elections, which is sort of really getting busy right around this time with elections coming up. People are trying to register to vote. And before they do that, they have to first confirm if an address is valid or not. To do that, the process that they do right now is that they go on to our county website, our web mapping application, and put in an address. If the address is valid, it will come up in the search result, and they're able to then register the address. And in some cases, a valid address is placed within the county, but first, because it's not an exact match, address doesn't come back from our web application. A couple other issues with our web application is that since a third party maintains our application, we only get one update per month. So if a house has just been built, a new address has been applied for and granted, that address, depending on when our last update to the map was, may not show up in our database quite yet. So we needed a way to verify that a valid address was done. So the way that's done is the Board of Elections representative would send an email to the 911 director. 911 director would typically quickly find out if an address is valid based off of his knowledge of the system, the data, and all the runs and calls that they utilize. So he has a pretty good knowledge of the system. Every once in a while, an address will come up that's a valid address, but it's not easily figured out if it's valid or not. That's when GIS and the Belmont County engineers gets involved. And that's when we sift through historical documents and figure out if an address is valid based off of historical names. Sometimes a street will be dedicated one thing, but then later changed to another. Although the historical name is still valid for the addressing, it's not currently used except for people that have lived there for a long time, or if they have family members, if they're moving into a family member house that utilize the old address, we aren't always able to sort of pair the two. Once we figure out that we update our aliases for that particular address and then tell the engineer's office to, or the Board of Education, that that address is valid. So when I learned about Placekey, I thought, how could we use this? How can we apply this process to our current process, or better our current process, so that we could validate addresses without going through this long process of emails. For our current roadblocks, from what I could tell, our current roadblocks were that our 911 data didn't currently have street address or mailing city, nor did it have a zip code. After doing some research and playing around with Placekey, I learned that in order to get a Placekey, you didn't necessarily have to have both a address, parcel, mail city, or and a zip code. You only needed one or the other. So what I ended up doing was taking our 911's address data, converting it to points, and doing a spatial join with our zip code file, so that our mailing our 911's addressing database then has a 911 or a zip code field. I then wrote a simple, straightforward Python script to then request an API key for the addresses within our 911 address. So with all of our addresses having a Placekey, the next question was, how can I allow the other departments that need to utilize 911's addressing to easily access the data? I could have created standalone applications to place on people's computers, but then the same problem that we have with our web mapping application would apply to the standalone application. As soon as I put the data onto their computers, it becomes outdated as soon as 911 updates their data, right? So I thought that the best solution would probably be some sort of web environment. That way I can update the data as needed, and they would always have access to it regardless of where they were trying to access the data, from their home computers, from their work computers, from a phone. It made it that much easier. So what I ended up doing was I ended up creating an application utilizing Python and Flask. The application is simply a simple web form, address form. What that web form does is the election board member would submit an address based off of what the citizen has given them. That form would then go out and request its own Placekey from Placekey, and then it would take that Placekey that it got from that first submission and then compare it to what is available in the 911 database of the list of Placekeys that I got for the addresses. If there's a match, then that address that 911 has in their database is then returned to the user as a valid address. If no place key is found, or if the address comes up as invalid, then that person then either an address error or address not found error would then be returned. So what I ended up with was basically something like this, a very basic web form that is available via the web. Right now, currently, since I'm still in sort of beta testing, it's all done in virtual environment on my local machines that I've sort of presented to the various departments. So it's not quite live yet, but a basic web form available. And then the person would submit an address, a basic address. Right now, it doesn't have a POI name because most people that go into register to vote usually won't say that they work or live at a point of interest. That's why I restrict it to just an address. And then once they hit submit, they either get an error or, as stated, the address listed for that 911 has in their database. And essentially that is the overall workings and how I came up with the idea and how we're currently using it. I think it's pretty straightforward. Is there any questions?
This was great, Anthony. Really great background on this, and really appreciate you diving into these types of problems that you guys had to deal with. And looking at your presentation, I saw even on that last example, I saw, what was it, Gill's Lane or Gill's Street was the input, and it was outputted and matched to Gill's Lane. So really impressive on that side. Question for you is, when you're working with other types of agencies within the county, right? How often are they coming to you with requests versus you sort of having the tooling out there for them to be able to perform their jobs effectively? And how do you sort of straddle that line between working with and making sure that you can still tackle the amount of work that you have to do?
Well, for the most part, various departments don't always voluntarily come to us for work unless they're absolutely in a bind. Currently, we're working with, outside of certain departments, 911 is one of the outliers that they truly understand how important GIS is, because they obviously use it and utilize it every day. Other departments need some coaxing. In some cases, they sort of maybe publish a map that isn't quite cartographically friendly. So I reach out to them and sort of offer our services. As far as juggling work that we do sort of like with the engineers, it hasn't been that much of an issue yet. We are a small department, so maybe in the future it may become an issue where we're juggling engineers' work with other department work. But right now, it hasn't been too much of an issue.
That's really great. We did get one question in, or really a comment in the message in the chat about sort of NG 911. And can you give a little bit of background onto where Belmont County is in the NG 911 process and how you guys have started to think about this?
Currently, and again, I'm sort of a support person. I have been brought in sort of as a support person for, so I'm not 100% brought up on Belmont County's 911. As far as I know, we're still in the planning stages for Next Gen 911. One of the things that I've learned in this is that there's different definitions for Next Gen 911, right? There's a county over adjacent to us, Harrison County, who has claimed, they're claiming that they're currently using Next Gen 911, but what they mean by that is something completely different than what Belmont County will be utilizing Next Gen 911. If it's the Next Gen, if the question asker is referring to the Next Gen 911 that I'm thinking of, we're still in the planning phases, and from from my understanding, those guys are still sort of in talks with on development. As far as 911's readiness, as far as from my understanding, as far as the features needed to implement that, those are features that we've already been providing to the GIS 911 department as it is. So whenever it's time to actually transition to the next gen 911, it's just a matter of, actually, there's really no difference on our part. It's just a matter of providing that data to the contractors that will be implementing that system.
That's really great. And we had another question in the chat, and so I don't know if you necessarily know this offhand, but when you're working with addressing, especially with things that are USPS deliverable versus not, do you have any sense for the number of addresses that you guys work with within Belmont County that are USPS deliverable addresses versus addresses that are valid? This sort of dovetails into another conversation that was having across how it validates to non-USPS validated addresses. So just curious what your experience is with USPS validated versus not.
Well, and I think that is a great question, because that is one of the aspects of 911's addressing, is that like I mentioned, the 911 addresses, even though that 911 is responsible for assigning these addresses, they don't always match with the deliverable addresses, mainly because we don't use the mail city and we don't use the zip code. So there is, and I did notice that there may be some sort of missing some portion of the addresses that we do have that aren't exactly being given a place key, because they don't align with what USPS has as a deliverable address, because it may be slightly different or too different. We're dealing with a database that was passed on from one administration to the next that's been probably close to 2 decades old now, where fields were used. For instance, we have a house number suffix and an address to field. The house numbering suffix is typically used for one aspect, but at some point it was changed to something else. So they switched to an address to address, which is supposed to designate the suite or apartment number. And then even that got changed to designate whether it's a well pad, a mailbox, or a light pole. A lot of our addresses aren't going to be exactly USPS addressing. Like I said, the database is designed or had emergency or first responders in mind before the USPS deliverable aspect of it. Excuse me.
That's really great background. Thank you for that. As you've started to really get your hands around the Placekey API and this sort of and having this common join key throughout, and we saw this one example between 911 and voter registration details. Like, what other types of workflows have you started to think about in order to best accomplish the sort of the task at hand, and how have you seen that Placekeys might help with some of these other projects that might be top of mind for you?
I actually thought about a couple things. One, just a general, once we have more people using Placekeys, creating a address locator to base solely off the Placekey field, as opposed to having the various address locators. So you can have a single field address locator, or you can have the multi-field address locator for me, or you can have your merged place address locators. For me, having that single field would make things a little bit easier when placing points or data in a table. But also think that this may be a great opportunity, or a different way, not necessarily a better way, but a different way of aggregating data. A lot of times we aggregate to, with respect to the health department, they aggregate up to a zip code or a city block. Sometimes those work for certain aspects. I think being able to aggregate up to these where polygons would give us a different way to view the data. So those are a couple ways that I've thought about using this.
That's a really interesting use case around using the hexagons and the where components to be able to do some sort of aggregations within that. That's really interesting. And so when you've when you started to think about a lot of these analyses, talk me through like currently, what are the types of tools that you use today to best accomplish those types of things? And what would, if looking many months and years down the road, what are the types of sort of integrations that you think Placekey would provide a huge amount of value in within the tools that you use every day?
Well, the tools that I use mainly fall within the ESRI toolbox. Anything that's ESRI provides within our licensing, I utilize as much as I can. That coupled with my ability to program, I don't like to call myself a programmer. I'm someone that likes to tinker and to build things to mostly automate my jobs. A lot of things that I do when I first got started were long drawn out processes, and I hate tedious projects. So as soon as I see those projects and I know I can automate them, I use my programming ability with the various tools in ESRI's toolbox to automate them. The way I see the ability to go out and get a new key or request a key at any time via programming opens up a possibility of various applications that could be built. Standalone applications like I potentially thought about for the application I built, or web-based applications. I think the possibilities truly are endless when you're talking about locating data based off of different or different variations of the same address.
That's really great. Yeah, I think everybody here who's had to work with address level data sets, especially when it's inputted from users or from individuals, can always be a challenge. And I think messy is an understated word when we're thinking about what those inputs kind of look like. This was really great, Anthony. Thank you so much for taking the time here. I think that's broadly the extent of the questions that we had, but this has been really great. There's still a few minutes left in a couple other sessions as well that we'd recommend diving into, and of course this will be recorded. But Anthony, is there anything last that you might share to any other sort of county GIS or city GIS teams that might be thinking about adopting and working with Placekey?
I think at least playing around with it, there's nothing. It's a no loss situation. It's a win-win situation. Yeah, you learn. For me, I've learned working with it. I've learned a lot more about the current data that I work with in supporting 911, but also helps me think about how to utilize this in various different ways. So I think if you work with addresses in any way or parcel data in any way, it might be. It's a win-win situation. You might as well just at least try it like we have. I think this is something that will help streamline a lot of our data. At least clean up, at the worst, it will help us clean up data that we know is may not be exactly 100% right. So it's also a method for helping us clean up the data.
This is great. Thank you so much, Anthony. This was really awesome getting to hear your background and getting to hear the types of stuff that you've been playing around with here. Thank you again so much. And again, anybody who's still in here who has another extra 5 minutes, dive into another session as well. We'd love to see you in there to catch the tail end of a couple other sessions. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Thank you.